Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, just making sure we don't have any stragglers coming in. If you can hear me, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, awesome. All right. We'll get started in just a few. We'll just wait for a couple more people and then we'll start. All right, we will get started. It's about 3 minutes after 10:30. Thanks everyone for being really flexible today with the setting of this meeting. We just had some concerns about COVID, and so we moved it to a virtual setting. So thanks everyone for being flexible. We appreciate it. Awesome. I'm going to go through and just see who we have from each county. So please unmute yourself when I call your county. All right, let's see. Bullitt.
That's Kenny Harden and Justin Warren here for Bullitt County.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, and then we've got, is anyone from Henry here?
Yes, this is Mike Sawalich from Henry County.
Hi, Mike. Okay, awesome. All right, and then Oldham.
Yes, this is Jerry Nart from Oldham.
Jim Urban, Oldham.
Great. Okay, and then Shelby.
Judge Eisen.
Brian Lipke.
And I think John Park is on here somewhere.
Yep, one's on Chris Spalding and Steve Eden from Simpsonville.
Okay, great, great. All right, and then Spencer,
You got Judge John Riley, and Chris Lemp is going to introduce quite a few folks there, it looks like.
Chris, can't hear you, Chris. Still, still can't hear you. Will you put it in the chat box, Chris? Okay, awesome. All right, and then Trumbull County.
Todd Pollock here.
Andrew Stark as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. And then do we have any of our cities here as well? I think I see Arthur with the city of Shelbyville. Anyone else from any of our cities? Okay. We will get started then. Okay, thank you, Chris. I got your message. Since we have a representative from every county, we will go ahead and get started. I'll be giving a presentation. If you have any questions throughout, this is a super informal setting, albeit virtual. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions, and I'll ask for questions at the end as well. So let me just share my screen. All right. Oh. Okay. All right. So again, thanks everyone for being very flexible today. And we are here to talk about the 2021 Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan for the counties of Bullitt, Henry, Oldham, Spencer, Shelby, and Trimble. So we will get started. So first off, for those of you that aren't familiar with KIPDA and myself, I'm Olivia Rancine. I'm the Community and Economic Development Specialist here at KIPDA. And KIPDA is many things. We are a metropolitan planning organization, an area development agency, and an area agency on aging, which means that we have a transportation division that also covers 2 of our counties in Indiana, Clark and Floyd. And then I'm with the Community and Economic Development Division, and we cover all of your counties as well as Jefferson County, except for the HMP. We also have a Geographic Information Services division that handles our mapping and helps assist many of our communities with different mapping requirements. And we have a Social Services division that does a wide array of things, mostly related to Medicare and Medicaid and assisting older adults and those with disabilities. So my division, Community and Economic Development, we lead hazard mitigation planning. There are 4 of us, and I am the project lead on this project and primarily handle HMP. So what is the HMP for those of you that are not familiar? And I'm transitioning to using the word HMP rather than hazard mitigation plan, just because it's a little bit less of a mouthful. But the HMP is required for communities under the Stafford Act of 2001. So basically what it does is it assesses the likelihood that a natural disaster will occur, and it formulates how our communities can better prepare for natural disasters, primarily through different infrastructure and policy projects. And it also, and it's at the regional level. So that means it includes all of your respective counties and cities. We do this at the regional level because our counties encounter a lot of the same disasters and are impacted by a lot of the same disasters. So it's better to have a regional response. It also simplifies the process for all of our counties instead of having to write their own independent plan. And essentially what comes out of it is it creates different resiliency projects that will be used to essentially to apply for different FEMA funding and different project funding sources. And the plan is required to be updated every 5 years. So our last plan was in 2016. And so our update is for the year 2021, which it's hard to believe that 2020 is almost over because it's been terrifying, but we are very close to 2021. And most importantly, what the HMP does is it makes our communities eligible for FEMA grants. So hazard mitigation assistance is directly tied to our communities having an updated hazard mitigation plan on file that is required by the federal government in order to apply and receive funding from FEMA for hazard mitigation assistance. So it's really critical for our communities. So I kind of touched on this, but some major components of the hazard mitigation plan. We have our risk assessment. And our risk assessment basically describes the hazards, typically natural disasters in our region. It identifies community assets, it analyzes risks, and it summarizes vulnerability. And the risk assessment then leads to the mitigation strategy, which comes up with goals and specific actions and an action plan on how to mitigate risk in our communities, and it ties it directly back to different projects specifically tied to FEMA funding and different policies for our communities. And a big part of the HMP is public participation, which is a little bit difficult these days given COVID. However, we are doing our best to adapt. So community outreach, engagement with the public through meetings, social media, interviews. I'll be reaching out to several of you to have in person or over the phone one-on-one interviews about different issues with hazards in your communities, and then meetings like this regional hazard mitigation council meeting. I'll also be attending several fiscal court meetings next week and presenting on the hazard mitigation plan there. Those are all critical pieces of developing the HMP. So why do our communities need to participate, and why should they participate? So essentially, as I've touched on before, what's a huge part of this is our eligibility for FEMA grants. So communities and counties and communities must participate and pass the resolution and adopt the HMP in order to be eligible for FEMA funding after a disaster. That's very critical. And then another part of this is breaking the cycle. So we have a cycle in the United States where essentially there's a disaster, we rebuild, there's another disaster, we rebuild, and that's a really dangerous and spiraling cycle that creates a lot of cost. We see a lot of that going on, say in California, where they have ridiculous numbers of wildfires, which they experienced a couple years ago, and in the same communities, and they happen again, they rebuild, they happen again. That's not a feasible way to approach disasters and to mitigate cost. So we recommend that our communities are part of this process so that we can limit costs that y'all end up occurring and be more prepared for disasters. So on average, about $1 is invested in mitigation. For every dollar invested in mitigation, an average of $6 is saved, which is pretty impressive. And planning and hazard mitigation plans like these make mitigation projects happen and help our communities save money and be better prepared. Also, what comes from this mitigation planning process is some precise actions and projects. That's a really huge goal of the state right now, is to have a series of very precise actions and projects that can be tied back to FEMA funding. So say if we have a disaster in our area, which we have one every year, and it's usually a flood, as many of us know, we then become eligible for hazard mitigation assistance funding. And the plan will outline several different projects for our communities. So instead of having to come up with a project idea or try to figure out what to do when applying for FEMA funding, our communities can simply reference this plan. And that's why it's so essential for our communities to participate, so we can come up with these projects already, and our communities can then go back to them when there is a disaster or when funding becomes available. And then also, we essentially, our communities do not have to pay for this plan. They pay in a monetary sense. They pay through this plan through in-kind donations of time. So we don't charge our communities for these plans. We simply want our communities to participate in the process. And I guess I shouldn't use the word want. We need you to participate in the process. This is how FEMA expects us to pay for the plan, is through your participation. So it's required that our communities participate so that this plan can happen, and so that y'all are not charged monetarily. It should be noted that FEMA only gives credit to those county, city employees or officials that do not receive part of their salary from federal funds. So for example, emergency managers, we want to have you as involved in the process as we can. However, we cannot count their time towards our in-kind donation for your community. So it's important to know that. But judge executives, deputy judge executives, city planners, city engineers, public works directors, and many more, their time is eligible. So for example, we'll be recording the meeting today and have a list, and we'll be using that list to show to Kentucky Emergency Management that we had a certain number of participants from each community and that they don't receive federal funds for their position. So it's really essential that everyone participates and answers my calls and emails, so that we can make sure no one is on the hook to pay for this plan, and that we simply show that participation was adequate. Essentially, we need about 550 hours of in-kind donations from the region, or about 92 hours of public participation per county, which sounds like a lot, but I've created several spreadsheets on how to do this. So essentially how this can happen and how we can meet this requirement is through various different ways. So for example, the first is this meeting itself. We will count your time here as part of your in-kind donation. I will also be reaching out to our planners, our engineers, our public works folks, and our local officials to schedule one-on-one meetings via Zoom or over the phone to discuss the hazard mitigation plan, and that also counts. I'll also be attending several fiscal court meetings and giving presentations on the hazard mitigation plan, which can count. We'll have everyone sign in at that meeting who's attending, and their time can count. And then, let's see. And then, sorry, 1 second. I think we got someone say something in the chat. 1 second. Okay. 1 second. All right. Okay. Sorry, I was just checking the chat. Thank you, Judge Polak. All right. So fiscal court meetings count, as well as city council meetings. So I'll be attending several city council meetings as well and giving presentations. So anyone who's at those meetings, their time can count towards your in-kind donation. So I'm trying to be at almost every other couple months at those meetings to give an update on the HMP. So you'll definitely be hearing from me, and I'll be attending a couple fiscal court meetings next week. And then I'll also be attending LEPC meetings, which is a great space for members of the community that are really knowledgeable about the different disasters and hazards we face to collaborate on this. So we can also use their time as part of our in-kind donation. We'll be talking more about this later, but we've tried to pivot during COVID, as many of our communities had to. And so we have created a website that will have different materials for y'all to review, as well as a feedback application. And we can count any time that you spend on that site as part of your in-kind donation. I'll go over that later more in detail, but that's part of our effort, especially during COVID when we can't have many in-person meetings, to get that time counted. We will also have surveys on the site as well, and the surveys will track your time that you spend responding to questions about your community and how it's prepared for disasters. All right, so how can communities help with the HMP? What are we looking for from y'all? So what's really important for us is that we identify local vulnerabilities and opportunities. So we use a lot of state data, which is awesome, and tells us a lot about different disasters in our region. However, there's a lot of local knowledge that we don't have, and that's not available on the state database, such as, a road in your community that always floods, or other issues that you've been having that are not going to show up in a storm or hazard database. And so we really need to know about those so that we can include them in the plan and create projects and strategies to address them. Also, one thing that I've already mentioned that we really need you to do, especially during COVID, is review HMP materials and answer our surveys. So we will be producing different reports, and we will be asking for you to review them via our online portal. That is super essential, so we know what your thoughts are, because at the end of the day, this is your community's plan. We'll also be having surveys to kind of get a feel for what some of your ideas and thoughts are on the HMP moving forward. And that's really important too, because it helps us shape the plan. Another way that communities should participate is by suggesting mitigation actions. Again, these are your communities, and we want to build a plan that's centered around you, with actions that are pertinent to what your community can do and has the capacity to do. And then once we come up with a list of mitigation actions and projects, we will want our communities to rank potential actions as well and determine which action should be prioritized. All right. Okay, so I've been talking a lot about hazards very loosely, but specifically, what disasters do our communities face? So some of the disasters that we face and that are covered in our plan are dam failure, which is more of a concern than you would think. We have a lot of dams in our region. Drought, earthquakes, extreme cold, extreme heat. That's particularly pertinent as the temperature increases and as our summers get even hotter. Hail, as we know, hail can break a few windshields and it can also ruin crops. Wildfires, as we have communities that exist in rural settings, as they encroach on more space that used to be wildland, that creates the wildland urban interface, where development is encroaching on wildland, which creates a situation that is more vulnerable to wildfires. Also floods. As many of you know, floods are honestly the biggest threat that we face in this region, particularly to property, and definitely have the highest cost. Sinkholes, it's not something that we think about all the time, except when trying to remember that car, oh my goodness, the car that fell, the car museum that fell into a sinkhole in Kentucky a couple years back. It's usually not something you think about, but we do have a karst landscape And the karst landscape and sinkholes can impact our communities in ways that you wouldn't expect. Also landslides and severe storms, so lightning, thunder, wind, severe winter storms, and tornadoes, which we are right in Tornado Valley and are always a concern for our region. So those are the disasters that in hazards that we're going to cover in our plan. So how does the hazard mitigation plan address these hazards? Well, the first part, which I've touched on, is the risk assessment. And so the risk assessment is kind of a three-part assessment, which includes the hazard ID, essentially what can happen here, the vulnerability assessment, who will be impacted, what will be impacted, and the capability assessment. So how can we better prepare, and how prepared are we already? So the hazard ID portion of the risk assessment essentially identifies hazards in the planning area, which we kind of just went over, and then it profiles them and explains what these hazards are. And we get data on these hazards from different sources, so past disaster declarations, from our planning team, from existing plans, from our GIS analysis, insurance data, and federal and state databases. And then we also have the vulnerability assessment, which is the second part of the risk assessment. The vulnerability assessment is both qualitative and quantitative. And it essentially looks at county and local parcel data and estimates loss to buildings, infrastructure, and critical infrastructure. And it also does an analysis of how it impacts our social environment, how it impacts our citizens. And sometimes that's more pertinent than others. For example, with extreme heat doesn't have a long-lasting impact on buildings and infrastructure. However, experiencing extreme heat can really impact our social environment and impact our community members, especially older adults and people of lower income who may not have access to air condition. So that would be an analysis of the social environment rather than the built environment. And for example, for flooding, we will look at property losses, what are historic property losses. So it kind of depends on the hazard and where its impact lies. And that's what the vulnerability assessment does. And then the capability assessment is the last part of the risk assessment. And essentially what it does is it looks at what resources are in place to kind of implement mitigation projects and where are our gaps. So those categories can include planning and regulations, administrative and technical, fiscal, education and outreach, mitigation, and political. So again, it's looking at where are our strengths, where can we improve, how can we make different projects and policies happen so that our communities are more resilient to these hazards and disasters. All right, so why does the risk assessment matter? So the risk assessment is so essential because it helps us determine what our mitigation goals and projects are. And again, those mitigation goals and projects are tied back to FEMA funding. So that's why it's very essential for our communities. So how do I learn about the hazards my community faces? I also now realize that I wrote communite instead of community, so that's something. Well, we are going to go over how to use the website that we've created in the wake of COVID. So let me pull it up here. All right. And this will be available on the KIPDA website. I've also sent it out on the agenda, and I'll be sending out the link again after the meeting. So you simply go to KIPDAHazardMitigation.org. That's our website that we've created. And this is the KIPDA Hazard Mitigation Planning Portal. We have a really handy YouTube video right here to explain how to use the portal, just in case this tutorial isn't enough or in case you forget. So this is the home screen. Say I want to learn more about what HMP is. So if I want to learn more about hazard mitigation planning, simply go here and I can look up, oh, what is the hazard mitigation plan? I press this button, tells me a little bit more about it. There's a series of questions here. You simply press to see more information and then press again for it to collapse. So that's how you can learn more about HMP if this presentation wasn't enough. And then to learn specifically about hazards in your region, you go to the tab that says Explore Hazards. And we have all the hazards available here, and many of them have maps and interactive maps. So for example, let's look at dam failure. So you'll see right here, we have a map of dams in the KIPDA region. And what's great about this map is it's noted that you can hover over each dam to see its name, hazard class, and county. So you can hover and see info about the dam and where it's located. You can also zoom into the map using this and then zoom out. So that's pretty awesome. So you know where dams are located in your community. And then you can go down here and find out more information about dams and the threats they pose to our communities. So again, if I want to learn more about maybe the quality of dam infrastructure in the state of Kentucky, I press, I see information such as Kentucky has a D+ rating on dam infrastructure. It's not super reassuring. And then I press again to collapse. You can do that for each of these features and learn more about dams in our communities. We'll also look at flooding. So flooding, we have a wonderful map created by our GIS team of the KIPDA region floodplains that you'll see right here. This is not an interactive map. As you'll note, it doesn't have any sort of indication that you can hover, which is how you can tell. And then again, go here for more information on floodplains and pressing to open, pressing again to collapse. And then we have this map of housing in floodplains in the KIPDA region, which says hover. So we can hover and see information about where housing and floodplains exist in the KIPDA region, which is pretty cool. Again, when you hover, you get more information. So those are just two of the hazards, but all of the hazards are available on this site. Please note right now that we just have some really minimal information and a vulnerability map available. We will be adding to this as we go along with a full risk assessment, but this is a really good starting point so you can familiarize yourself with hazards and vulnerability in your region. So say that I have spent time, taken time out of my day to look at these maps and read over the information. Go to surveys and time tracking under how to participate. And this is how we're going to help increase our in-kind donation instead of having to meet in person. So you would click here for H&P time tracking form. And then you simply record when you were reviewing items. So say I was reviewing something today from 11 a.m. to 11:30. I would just put that down there and choose the day. You do when you start to when you finished. You do an electronic signature. And if you review multiple times, you can do second review or third review and include it, but you don't have to. And then you press submit form. And that helps us keep track of the time that you spend reviewing materials so that we can get that in-kind donation from your community. So that's pretty great. If you have any questions about the time tracking form, don't hesitate to reach out to me. What's also on this page is our H&P initial survey that we would like for everyone to fill out. This kind of gives us an idea of how your community feels about the hazards in our region and how you want to address these hazards and any potential ideas that you have. Also, what's great about this survey is it tracks the time that you spent on the survey so that we can count that time towards our in-kind donation as well. All right. So going back to the site, if you go under how to participate in meetings, this will show you when our next meeting is. Obviously, you need to change this, but this has our event calendar if you have any questions. And then another feature that we have available that we're really excited about is our feedback map. So our feedback map, essentially what the purpose of it is for our communities to tell us about localized issues that we're not going to capture over state data. And so you simply click on this button. It takes you to this application that we here at KIPDA have built. I've done a couple examples over here, and then you press submit a report. So say we have a couple different categories. If it doesn't suit you, we have other hazard issue, but say you have a project idea, or if you have issues in your community such as sewer overflow, persistent power outages, debris issues, flooding issues, infrastructure issues, simply select one. Sewer overflows, leave a comment. Sewer overflows are an issue. You can select an address by typing it in, or you can simply find it on the map. So I'll do an example and say, I have a problem right here. You can see the little circle right here. It says click data point. Once you've clicked, press report it. All right, and you can press back here. And there, our comment is right there on the map. So we'll be using those comments to help guide the plan. We'd really appreciate your feedback on this map. Any time that you spend working on this mitigation feedback map, please count that towards your time on the time tracking survey. So that is a pretty good overview of the website. Again, I'll be sending out the website after this meeting. It will be also available on the KIPDA website. And it's pretty simple to use. And if you have any questions or issues, simply watch the YouTube video. It gives a pretty good overview, or shoot me an email. This is just a great way for y'all to interact with this information, provide us with feedback, all virtually. So this is kind of how we're adapting during COVID to make sure we reach that in-kind donation requirement. All right, I'm just going to finish my presentation. Okay. Well, all right. So probably what you've been wondering is how long is this going to take? Well, we are hoping to have this completed by early fall of 2021 so that our communities are eligible for HMA funding. We received our funding late for this project, which is also why we are feeling a little bit rushed for in-kind donations. We were hoping to receive our funding and start this project late last fall. However, FEMA has been incredibly slow. We've talked to other area development districts in the region and they've had the same issue. So we've had to adjust, and I'm spending almost all of my time on this project now. And we're going to be asking a lot of our communities coming up just because we have really limited time to work on this project. So I will be reaching out to attend your meetings, to talk to you over the phone, and just really value your response and your participation in this process. So the last slide is just some tasks that I would like for y'all to do. We would really appreciate if you could review the website that I just shared, and make sure to fill out the time tracker form after you've done your review so we can track that time. Also make sure to take the HMP survey that's also on the HMP portal, so that we can get an idea of how hazards are perceived in your community. If you know of any local hazards or have project ideas, as I showed you, fill out the HMP feedback form. You can locate exactly where it is on the map, and that is so helpful for us. Also, we have been hoping to start analysis on how hazards impact property, and what are some potential costs with that. And so we've been wanting to collect data from the PVA office on this. So we would really appreciate if our judge executives or city officials could let the PBA office know that we will be requesting information, and this is for their community, because that information will ultimately be used to basically to assess, how many buildings are at risk, what is the property value of those buildings, what is the total hazard risk, and that's a really essential piece of our risk assessment. Also, for our emergency managers, please make sure to reach out to me on my cell or my email about all upcoming meeting dates for 2021 for LEPC. I'm hoping to attend all of the LEPC meetings and kind of give an update about HMP. That way we can meet our time requirement and also get that really critical participation. Also, if you know of anyone else who should be included or contacted in this process, who knows a lot about hazards or has more local knowledge, please reach out to me so that I can give them a call. I'd really appreciate that. Our next regional meeting is tentatively scheduled for March 10th. Hopefully this will happen in person, especially with the new vaccine coming out, but who knows? So I will keep you all updated. All right, I'm going to stop my share and just see if we have any questions. Actually, first, could I have everyone who has multiple people in their Zoom write down those names in the chat box? I think we have a couple already, but we'll record the names via Zoom, but there might be a couple people attending on one Zoom screen. So we want to make sure we have their names just for the in-kind donation of time. So if you could put that in the chat box, if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate that. All right. Do we have any questions or any concerns? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Olivia, when you're tracking these different times and working kind and whatnot, is there any opportunity for us to use, like for instance, whenever you go to PBA and request boundaries and whatnot for those parcels, some of PBA, especially Bullitt County, has recently done a flyover to be able to account for buildings and footprints and whatnot. So if you're doing any sort of analysis on which buildings or how many properties are going to be impacted by a flood event, is there any way to account for that in working kind? Is like they've paid for these flyovers and this data collection. So would there be an opportunity there to be able to account for that as part of the work in kind if they gift that information to
if they gift that
effort?
information? You know what? That's a really good idea, Arthur. I'm gonna check with Nick Grinstead from KYEM about that. Because I haven't had a question like that before, but I think that could be really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would like to just step in and say that we can also allow members of the public to take that initial HMP survey, we can count the time that they spend filling out the survey towards the in-kind match requirement from our local community. So we will create, of course, and post the survey on our social media. We'll send out a link for that as well, and that's something that you all can share with your communities and share with the public, that we can get feedback from them as well. That also counts towards match requirement and also gives us much more inclusive and safe way to get some public feedback in this process as well.
Yeah, we'll share those social media posts with you coming up here soon. Do we have any other questions? Again, I'll be sending out the website after this meeting. Also, just because we had to adjust to a virtual meeting today, I will likely be sending out a form for y'all just to put your name, your email, and your position on so that we have a record of all of the attendees, probably a virtual Google Doc from KYEM. So be on the lookout for that as well, because we want to make sure we get all of that time recorded.
Olivia, this is Arthur again. Along that same line, that if you can coordinate with Danielle, maybe there's some efforts that are going on with MS4s, because our biggest and most hazardous situations flooding. MS4s are doing a lot of effort right now in mapping what they've got and trying to get a handle on, where their hazards are and how we can start addressing some of those. So I don't know if we can work together with some of our MS4 partners within the communities, because I mean, Danielle and your all's team at KIPDA are doing a huge project right now in Bullock County and mapping a great deal of our stormwater system. So that may be another avenue if you guys could look into, potentially using that as a mapping funds or portion thereof.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think
Definitely look into that.
And that's a good point for you to bring up, Arthur. That's definitely something that should be that's discussed and included in our HMP, what's happened with MS4. That's absolutely essential.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions or concerns? Danielle, was there anything else needed to add?
No. I just want to, just make it clear, we're talking about, your in-kind donation, but I do want to make that clear that that's a friendly word for match requirement. Your local share, we call it donation, but it is absolutely required. So I just want to make that very clear. And we're going to try to do our best to track it. And like I said, we've planned out as much as we can to try to get these hours in, to have the public participation time count. So we're trying to get creative with it. But I did want to reiterate that. And we greatly appreciate your all's involvement in this and switching gears and changing this process up a little bit. It's different than what you all are accustomed to in the past. So we appreciate you all getting on board and utilizing the portal that Olivia has created, which I think she's done a fantastic job with. And if there's any sort of data or anything that you want added to that you think would be more useful, please let us know and we will respond to that. We have Anne Marie and Adam Forces with our GIS team that are participating with this, that can help us with getting data up there that you all would like to have access to. Again, just communicate with us. So we want this to be as seamless as possible since we're changing the process up quite a bit. So thank you. That's it. Yep.
Olivia.
Yes.
I've got a couple of questions. The information from 5 years ago, no doubt we will have access to and be able to simply update some of that.
Yeah, and we'll be sending, as we go through, I'm working with Anne Marie, as Danielle mentioned, and as we go through and update these hazards, we'll be sending out some forms and surveys as well, but we'll be updating that information, and that information will be available on the website as the update continues.
Also, one other thing, and a great presentation this morning. Will the recording be available to send to some folks maybe that weren't able to attend, like the mayor or some other folks that I'd like to have the opportunity to hear what you just presented and get them up to speed as well?
Absolutely. I'll send out the recording after the meeting.
Okay, and I assume they can log their time also after viewing that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Amazing. Thanks, Judge Riley. All right. Anyone else? Anything else? All right. Well, we will end the meeting then, and our next meeting will be on March 10th. Fingers crossed. Who knows what the world will look like? We're just trying to roll with the punches right now. So we appreciate your participation. Thanks, everyone. And thank you especially for accommodating this virtual format this morning.
One quick other thing I'll pop in here. Sorry. I do want to really thank Shelby County Fiscal Court.
Yes.
Thanks, Dan Eisen, and thanks, John Park. One, for Shelby County agreeing to be the actual applicant for the hazard mitigation grant that going through the county actually reduced the local match requirement that's going to be responsible for all of you all. So major appreciation for Shelby County stepping up and doing that, because it reduces your match requirement. So that's been essential in getting this. That's fantastic. So, and we appreciate them because we're going to be working with them throughout this process. And they're going to be essentially the pass-through for the grant funding for this process. So we are greatly appreciated for them for agreeing to do this. And also thank you all for the last minute changes this morning and being flexible. And so that's also we greatly appreciate that too. So just wanted to give a shout out to Shelby County.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Everyone have a good weekend.
Bye.